Joe LaRosa is a member of one of the oldest Sea Isle City families and a survivor of the March 1962 storm. He is a graduate of St. Joseph's Elementary School in Sea Isle City, Ocean City High School, and Rutgers University, where he earned a doctorate in education. He is currently a retired school administrator and lives offshore with his wife of 41 years, Barbara. He has 2 children and 2 grandchildren. A lifeguard in the community for 16 years, he was elected to the Sea Isle City Beach Patrol Hall of Fame in 2010. His book, Storm Stories, is on sale in Sea Isle City at Dalrymple's, JFK and Pleasure Avenue, Sands Department Store at the Acme Shopping Center, the Book Nook on the Promenade, the Sea Isle City Historical Museum, Amazon, and also you may contact Joe directly. Storm Stories is a follow-up to his first book, Our Perfect Storm, which he previously discussed at our meeting in July of 2012. So welcome back, Joe.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to the organization for the invitation to speak today. And as you know, this is a return visit. And regarding the 2 books, I'm kind of new at this whole Zoom format. I usually like to get up and walk around and work a room. So I hope I don't put anyone to sleep today, or just, geez, the kids are crying and get out. So anyway, both of my 2 books are exclusive to Sea Isle City. And it is not generally about the storm, it's about Sea Isle. And the one thing I want to note, and I actually heard Linda just casually refer to it, is since 1962 in Sea Isle, and now in Strathmere too, people who have experienced the event don't have a big name for it. They just call it the storm. So when I refer to the storm, that's the only storm that matters to me. Anyway, tonight I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to present, especially on Zoom. I was kind of all over the place. So what I want to try to do today is just try to briefly explain what happened during the storm and the differences in the 2 books. However, the main focus today is going to be on the most recent book, which is Storm Stories. And when you get a group of oral histories, they're tough to get together and cohesive. You need a backbone, you need a timeline, you need something to construct around. So what I used was the New Jersey State Police teletype. And I'll explain in a little bit what a teletype is, but that is what I use as my timeline. The museum, the New Jersey State Police Museum in West Trenton, is one of those things that you never go to. But if you're ever up in that area riding a bike on a bike path or something, it's worth sticking in. It's worth visiting. But anyway, I'm going to be using the timeline for a timeline, the New Jersey State Police type. I'm going to share individual stories. And while I have the individual stories, when I construct the book, I want the person who buys the book to get a general overview of the storm. So if you have no prior knowledge of it, all the individual histories should make sense and it should kind of be sewn together. Due to my technological limits, I have limited graphics. This is kind of what we're doing here. So please bear with me. Also today, I'm going to share selected readings from this book, Storm Stories. And that's in an effort to share what the survivors experienced firsthand. And then when we're all finished, I'm going to also answer some questions if you have any. So most important thing is, what was the 1962 storm? Everyone thinks it was a hurricane, but it wasn't. It was in March. What it was a really, really, really big northeast. It was a winter March northeaster. Why did it do so much damage? Because it was in very close and it stalled off of Sea Isle City. There was a high pressure system that went from Canada all the way over to England on a polar cap, and it blocked the storm that was coming up the coast from moving. So it stalled for 3 days. What happened after that is it kept bouncing off of the high pressure system, wound up in England, and England had major flooding and a major event also. Now, the difference between this Northeast and most of the other storms is that this storm resulted in unbelievable damage and destruction. A lot of you will remember Superstorm Sandy. Now, Sandy did a lot of damage, but there was no destruction. After the storm left, at least in Sea Isle City, everyone got everything that was damaged. They fixed their houses. They took it all to the curb, and the Public Works Department came and carted it away. Needless to say, that did not happen in 62 because there was so much destruction that it was impossible. And if you read these stories, and when I read the stories, you'll kind of get a feel for what it was like for some of the people. What was Sea Isle City like in 1962? Well, it wasn't anything at all like it is now. It had about 1,300 full-time residents, but it was a very active community. The heart of the town was from 39th Street to about 56th Street. That's where the development was. Below 36th Street, right on through Whale Beach to Strathmere, no development, or very, very little. Above 63rd Street, where the Acme is, no development until you get to about 80th Street. Central Avenue wasn't even cut through, which is the street behind the Acme. Landis Avenue went the course of the island, and Pleasure Avenue was nothing more than a series of paths along the dune that you could drive through. I don't know if you're familiar with Pleasure Avenue up in the 70s and 80s, but it kind of turns and moves and back and forth. That's the old path. The reason there's so many turns in it is that's how they got around the sand dunes. And after a while, they just paved over it. So that's how Pleasure Avenue was created. The biggest thing, especially for me being a kid, was there was a boardwalk from 39th Street to 44th Street. And it was full of attractions. In the wintertime, I used to ride my bike all there. And as I was saying before the program started, I had spots everywhere on that boardwalk in the summer where people would feed me. I would hang out. It was just the coolest thing in the world. I was a man about Sea Isle back then. I was 10 years old. The biggest and best attraction, and I'm going to have a picture of it in a second, was a hand-carved Denzel carousel. I don't know if anyone knows about carousels, but Denzel are made in Germantown, Pennsylvania. And it was a major tourist attraction, and it was gone. Okay, if we could, okay, we're on Our Perfect Storm. The book that you can see right there is Our Perfect Storm, which is my first book, and it is an annotated history. And by annotated, I mean it's researched, it includes endnotes, and nothing is in the book that I don't have at least 2 sources on. So it's documented and annotated. However, I had the opportunity to speak with just all the old timers from town and kids my age too. And I found out that everyone had a story. And with this, I learned a lot of different things that happened, and I collected them all. And there was so many of them that I couldn't substantiate. I couldn't use them in the first book. But I didn't want them to be the stories, that is, to be lost to time. So I promised myself that when I retired, I would publish them. And that's what I did. And that's the basis of this second book. If you could show the next slide, please. Okay. This is the latest book. It is called Storm Stories. It's in a collection of oral histories from the survivors of the March 1962 storm. As I started to say before, when I was trying to construct a book of oral histories, you can't just throw them in with no rhyme or reason. I kind of had to have some kind of chronological structure. So what I did was I had a bunch of stories. And out of that bunch of stories, I just want to try to have someone who has no idea of the storm be able to pick the book up and read it and get a comprehensive view of the storm. So what I did, as I said before, I used the New Jersey State Police teletype. And I'm going to just take a short reading from what a teletype is. Now, some of the younger people may have no idea, but back in the day, when you got your news, it was put on by AP or UPI on a machine called a teletype. And teletype was connected to every radio station and TV station in the nation. So God forbid, but when President Kennedy was assassinated, it was instantaneous. It went on to they used to call it the wire. It went on the wire and everyone had it. Now with cell phones and things like that, it's outdated. But what I have in the book here is the New Jersey State Police teletype. In our world, before the internet and cell phone, agencies responsible for covering large geographic areas kept in immediate communication by using a teletype machine. As a result, communication, we have a written record of events as they unfolded. The teletype was a big typewriter, and it would just spit out all kinds of information. The detailed records in the New Jersey State Police contain a wealth of information that show how the March 1962 storm took the area by surprise, the efforts to respond to the emergency in real time, and finally, the cleanup and security procedures that were put in place when the storm was over. So that is what I attempted to do, to give the book just a little bit of structure. So if we could show the slide, next slide, please. Okay, that is the boardwalk in Sea Isle City, and that's taken from 43rd Street and 43rd and the beach, obviously. The building right in the middle that's heading out to sea, the sea would be on the right-hand side, is the Madeline Theater, and that was obviously a movie theater built over the ocean. On the far left, you can see a black building with kind of an ice cream cone roof, a cupola. That is the Windsor Hotel. And that is where my mom worked. So I would ride my bike up and have my lunch in the summer. So it was really cool. And all this was destroyed in '62. So now to get on with a little bit of the storm stories. I have the first thing I have is the New Jersey State Police teletype, and it's dated March 6th, 1962 at 10:20 in the morning. And the teletype spit out to all New Jersey State Police stations. All roads leading into the ocean front are impassable at this time due to flooding. Sea Isle City, Avalon, etc. No evacuations are anticipated. The next story I'm going to read is what a lot of people find humorous, and everyone seems to ask for it, my friends. So it's about a friend of mine by the name of Wayne McMurray. Now, if you have any knowledge of the storm, there was a destroyer being towed by the U.S. Navy. And that was, the lines parted as it was being towed during the very first day of the storm. And the Navy basically lost the destroyer and it lost the tugboat. So from Virginia, they sent a destroyer out to go look for it, another Navy ship. And the gentleman who I'm going to read about, his brother was actually on the ship out in the middle of the storm looking for the lost destroyer. So anyway, I'm going to read to you about Wayne McMurray. As Wayne's older brother, Gene, was directly offshore from Sea Isle searching for the missing destroyer, these scenes were unfolding onshore with the second grade student and his family. Wayne was staying with his parents and younger brother in an apartment on the northwest corner of 42nd and Landis Avenue, above Sea Isle Hardware, directly across the street from Creighton's Trading Post. The hardware store was also owned by the Creighton family. As the first tide struck, Wayne remembers the water, then light debris, floating down 42nd Street from the beach towards his house. As the day progressed, the wind and rain picked up, and the tide began bringing larger pieces of debris. Pieces of buildings and boardwalk were floating past his house. Sometime during the afternoon, the apartment lost electric and phone service. As the storm intensified, through the apartment's front window, Wayne witnessed his father assisting the town's pharmacist, Bob Rubenstein, evacuate his family from the ground level apartment attached to the rear of his store. As Bob helped his three boys, Charles, Jeffrey, and Elliot, Captain Jack carried Bob's wife, Shirley, across Landis Avenue through the frigid waters to safety. The afternoon was now turning into late evening, and the powerless apartment was becoming dark and cold. Wayne had just turned 7 in February, and his younger brother, Jimmy, was only 2. His parents, Captain Jack and Jean McMurray, were becoming concerned for the safety of their children. It was then that Captain Jack realized a solution unique to his living accommodations. The apartment was heated from a system located on the ground floor of the store. Warm air was circulated to the upstairs apartment through a metal grate in the store's ceiling. Much like a spy movie, items to light and keep the house warm could be obtained by getting supplies from the hardware store below by gaining access through the heating grate. However, unlike the movie, the grate was too small for an adult to fit through. The solution was obvious, if not very conventional. After removing the grate, Captain Jack tied a rope around 7-year-old Wayne and lowered him down through the heating access hole. Drastic times call for drastic measures. Wayne recalls being very scared when the rope was tied around him and he was lowered into the store. He was told to get flashlights and batteries along with sterno and help heat the food. Once the supplies were procured, Wayne was once again hauled up through the grate in the ceiling to the apartment. So that's a sample of what some of the people were doing. Now, if you look at this photograph, this is a photograph of the Sea Isle City beachfront while the storm was actually happening. If you look in the center lower of it, you can see the damaged carousel, and we're going to see another picture in a second. And you can see behind that the Springfield Inn. The bank is still there, as is St. Joseph's Church. Everything else, I think, is torn down or razed or quadplexes or duplexes or triplexes or whatnot. But that is what the actual city looked like during the storm. The bridge was on 44th Street, which is where St. Joseph is, the bridge offshore. And you can see it kind of disappear into the water. The road was flooded out. Okay. Here's one I'm going to include just to read because I can't see this happening in 2020, and it's actually hilarious. And it's dated the next day, March 7th, 1962, but it's at 1 o'clock in the morning, 1:03 actually, and it's a New Jersey State Police teletype. Approaches to Beasley's Point Bridge in Upper Township, Cape May County, are partially washed away. Motorists are crossing at their own risk. So I can't imagine what would happen now. Okay. I have a gentleman by the name of Pat Hafford, and he had a house. He lived with his family, and it was on 51st Street and the beach in Sea Isle City. It was right on the beach. So here's partially of Pat Hafford's story. As the tide continued to rise, the house began to shudder every time a wave hit the foundation's pilings. When the waves broke through the double door in the hotel lobby facing the ocean, Pat's father, Horace, and his uncle Bill strengthened it by nailing a 2x4 against it for support. The storm was increasing in intensity. Earlier, the family dog Runzel had been put out to do his business, but he never returned. The entire group was upset, and Pat's younger siblings were crying upon the loss of Runzel. But they were assured by their nervous father that animals have natural survival instincts. They'll be all right. But it was rather unconvincing. While his mother was beginning to serve dinner, the house gave a giant lurch forward, coming to rest at about a 15-degree angle. Much like a movie scene, food and people were thrown to the floor. Cabinets opened. Glasses, plates, knives, forks, all exploded all over the room. Everyone soon realized that the building was starting to fall into the sea. Pat's father instructed his wife, Helen, to, quote, take the children and run. Pat's mother instructed him to take the 4 youngest children and evacuate immediately to the Bednarik home, the only other occupied home on the block. Take the shortcut, she told him, as this was the safest and most direct path. The movement of the house had jarred the doorstuck, so Pat's cousin Mike needed to break the door to quickly exit the building. Pat, his brothers Mark and Greg, and cousins Michael and Jan, along with his cousin's dog Tubber, scrambled down the recently installed back steps into the night. Due to the floodwaters, the group took a while to navigate the neighbor's backyard, fences, and debris. It was windy, and the water that they were wading through was ice cold. Mike and Mark rushed on towards their destination. Pat, Jan, Greg, and Tubber lagged as Greg was only 6, and he and the dog needed to be carried. Cousins Mark and Mike, the advance team, arrived at the home of the neighbors, the Bednarik family, and followed shortly by the stragglers. Cold and lonely, they hoped to get out of the gale. As they walked up the stairs to the building, they were greeted by a familiar face, Runzel. He had escaped the teetering house earlier and, independent of the group, found his way to the Bednarik home. Pat still relates how the dog was, quote, smarter than all of us in seeking safety. He got there first. So that's that. All right, next slide, please. This is the Denzel carousel that was destroyed. It was, strangely enough, on the site of what is now the Carousel Bar. This is what was there before the Carousel Bar. All the horses were hand carved, and they were dispatched to the large fire when they cleaned everything up. You were not allowed to take them, not allowed to loot, although a couple of them have turned up in different places. The horses that are hand carved are worth over $20,000 to $25,000 each. And there are still, they're not just horses and things, they are actually works of art. Okay. If you could go to the next slide, please.
Ooh.
All right. That is, after the storm, the site of the 44th Street Sea Isle City Beach Patrol headquarters. That's what it was. That's what the street end looked like. You can see all the damage in all the houses. I'm going to read about Penelope Tracy and Terry Tracy. They lived at the end of Kennedy Boulevard. It was actually 41st Street because President Kennedy was in office. After the first tide, their home was without heat, water, sewer, or electric. In an effort to keep warm, the family started a fire in the fireplace. Eventually, the odor of gas was detected in the house. Penelope and Terry's father, along with cousin Tommy Bruin, went outside to investigate. Upon going outside towards the damaged boardwalk, they followed a loud hiss into a broken gas line that was wide open and venting natural gas into the air. The fireplace was immediately extinguished. On the second day, the wind and tide were becoming much more intense. Large waves started to race under the bowling alley and pound the side door of the Tracy home. The laundry room of the home was on ground level, accessed from the main portion of the house by going down a few steps. The wind and pounding surf were relentless, flooding the laundry room. As Penelope and Terry watched from the top of the small step, their parents, Harry and Rita Tracy, were in the room, struggling through the floodwater and attempt to salvage what they could. Suddenly, a large wave crashed against the door, blowing it off its hinges. The force of the wave knocked both Harry and Rita into the waist-deep frigid waters and swept them in the backwash towards the now open door. Penelope and Terry clearly remember their parents praying the Our Father as they were being swept out to sea. 7-year-old Terry remembers that this was his parents were going to die. Thankfully, both regained their footing in the ice-cold water and made it to the relative safety of the steps leading into the house. In an effort to at least slow down the waves now crashing directly into the laundry room, Harry again braved the surging water and went outside in an attempt to secure the door. For the second time within minutes, Terry thought that he would never see his father again. Eventually, the door was secured to the building. Terry Tracy was 8 years old when he was thinking all that, when he was watching his parents getting pulled out. I have one more reading right now I just want to share with you, and it's has to do with the Gooden people. Okay, this is from Leonard Bonnet Sr. Mr. Bonnet was the manager of the Acme, and he passed away last year at age 98. And he had his wits about him, and he was interesting to talk to. He was a very, very nice man. But here's part of his story. Witnessing firsthand the profound emergency gripping the community, Leonard and Joe Romano began going through the town, delivering perfectly good from the American store that was going to be destroyed to homes and buildings of those seeking shelter. At the Dan Libro home at 46th and Park Road, where about 30 people had sought their shelter, 3 brand new garbage cans full to overflowing with food were brought in to help feed the families who had been displaced. And I know this firsthand because I was at the Libro household, and I vividly remember the food being delivered, and my mom reached in the garbage can and got me a tasty cake. So I thought that was pretty cool. But these 2 champions, who were heroes really, delivered fresh food throughout Sea Isle City to many of the displaced and hungry residents seeking shelter. He was the manager of the Acme, and the Acme had water in it. And he knew as soon as the water got there that they were going to have to throw out all the food, even on the highest shelves. So he and Joe Romano, who was the produce manager of the Sea Isle Acme, started in Butch Romano's had a truck with high wheels, and they started driving through Sea Isle, and where they saw anyone staying or living, they were giving food out. And Mr. Bonnet was right. The state came in, condemned all the food, and it was carted away to a big fire that they had, and it was all dispatched. So that is just a sampling of some of the things, some of the stories that I have. And I'm saying this just in an effort to share. I feel silly in front of a camera. I kind of do better with the room, so I hope I didn't bore anyone. Now, if we can go to the next slide, I have a number of photographs here that should be of slight interest anyway to Strathmere. This is the Sea Isle Boulevard. It is after one of the tides, and it is right at the Garden State Parkway. So when you head out of the Sea Isle Boulevard at the Parkway, this is how flooded it was there, which is very high. You can see the power lines are down. Believe it or not, they were still active. There were some people in Sea Isle City that had power and phone throughout the whole time. Even though the power lines, as you can see clearly, were laying on the ground. So that is the Sea Isle City Boulevard. As you get closer into Sea Isle, it was completely washed away. There was no way to cross it. It was meadow to meadow. Next slide, please. This is an interesting photograph. This is from First Street looking towards Sea Isle. The road in the middle is Landis Avenue. You can see that on the left of Landis Avenue, on our left-hand side of the photograph, there's a lot of foundations and buildings. And you can see there's nothing attached to the foundations and buildings because those houses are gone. If you look at the far left, you'll see that some of the pilings holding the houses up are bent back. So it was a major, major storm. If you look on to the right on Landis Avenue, you see a number of houses that were just picked up and deposited there. They were eventually removed, and we'll get to that. The fire company took some of them and tried to burn them, but in talking to the fire chief, I learned that many of them were so saturated that they didn't burn. They had to break them up. Next slide, please. Here's one you may find very interesting. This is from about 6th Street, looking towards Strathmere. These are some of the pilings that you see. You can see they're bent back where it just picked the houses up and took off. On the left, facing the photograph, you can see a building, a long building. That is the Dolphin Motel. After the 62 storm, Rudy Plappert, who was the owner, picked it up and moved it across the street to where it is now. As you can see, it was actually perpendicular to the ocean rather than parallel with Landis Avenue. So that's the Dolphin Hotel. A little bit about Rudy Plappert. which is interesting, has nothing to do with the 62 storm, is Rudy Plappert during the Second World War was an officer on a German U-boat. And they always say they didn't, but needless to say, they would come into town and they would get supplies. They all spoke English, and they would get their supplies and head on back out. Because you have to remember, this was always deserted. But Rudy liked it so much here that he said after the war, this is where he's going to live. So him and his wife, after the World War II, moved to Sea Isle City. And he had a car. I was a kid again. He had a car. He had like one of those 1950-something Cadillacs that you could shave on the fins. I mean, it was huge. It was pretty cool. So anyway, that's the Dolphin Motel, and it's on the wrong side of Landis Avenue. So that's a lot of what I wanted to go over, just because I am on a timeline, and I hope I'm doing okay. But there's something else. I got two more readings, and before I get to them, I just want to say that there was no such thing as FEMA. There was no flood insurance. Individuals were responsible for their own losses. Businesses could receive low interest loans, but like every other year, taxes were due May 1st. If you didn't have a house, you had to pay taxes on it. If your house was damaged, you had to pay taxes on it. Mortgages were still due every month. If you had a house, if the house was gone, it didn't matter. You still had that mortgage you had to pay. So it was through self-reliance that everyone started building the town back to bring the town back to where it was. And I have an interesting reading here. It's from Sister Maria Theresia. She was actually my 8th grade teacher, 7th and 8th grade, at St. Joseph's in Sea Isle. So I'll read this. Now known as Sister Mimi Connor, she was assigned to teach 7th and 8th grade at St. Joseph's School in Sea Isle City for the 1965-66 academic year, 3.5 years after the storm. Professed in 1963 as a Sister of Mercy, St. Joseph's School would be her second teaching assignment. The Marian Sisters of Mercy operated Mercy Hospital in the resort. Additionally, another group of nuns from the order were assigned as teachers in St. Joseph's Parochial Parish School. Stated to teach at the school, Sister Mimi had known about the convents, which served as summer retreats and housing for those being assigned at the hospital, being destroyed by the storm in March of '62. She was also aware that repairs were recently completed to ensure the structural integrity of St. Joseph's School building as a result of storm damage. As classes started in September 1965, what she was not aware of, in a positive way, were the many hardships that endured by families of the students that she taught. Some of her students had lost everything they owned as their house fell victim to the sea. Sister Theresia said, they didn't talk about it. It just seemed that everyone in the community just picked up and rebuilt. Everyone was moving forward. In fact, it wasn't until almost 50 years later that she completely understood the full extent of what some of her students experienced. The events of the storm came into sharp focus for her as she attended the 50th year anniversary program sponsored by the Sea Isle City Historical Museum. Listening to the firsthand accounts of the storm and of the survivors, including some of the students that she had taught, was an eye-opening experience for her. Had I truly understood the magnitude of what happened, I would have used the students' experiences to further many of their assignments. Coming to the community merely 42 months after the devastating event, Sister Mimi does not recall anyone ever reflecting on what they had lost or about the terrible damage throughout the town and the community, or even how the residents had rebuilt the town. By 1965, it appeared that it was no longer an issue. The community had moved forward. That's what I have for today so far. And as was kindly said at the introduction, books can be purchased at Darraple's, the Book Nook, the Sands, Sea Isle City Historical Museum, Amazon. If you go to Amazon, you can search March 1962 storm. It should come up. Or you can email me at, strangely enough, March 1962 storm at Comcast.net. Now, the last photograph we have here is very interesting. It is from 26th Street looking towards Strathmere. That is a house in the middle of the road with trucks trying to get around it, obviously. And the people who owned the house, they tracked it down, who owned the house. And they had, I believe, 3 hours to take everything out before it was damaged because they had to keep the road open for emergency purposes, fire trucks, things like that. The building on the right with the dome is St. Rita's. Some of the local residents may remember St. Rita's. And in the book, actually, the person who owned that house, just by accident, I had a picture of it, wrote a poem, and the poem's included in the book about this house and the 1962 storm. So what I'd like to say is, if you are in Strathmere, I don't know who's in town anymore because it's been such a long time. I lost touch with a lot of people. But the Whitcamps, the Kingstons, and the Andreases, Eddie, I know Eddie's still around. Talk to him. If you see them, talk to him and ask him about the storm. They all have a story. Sea Isle City, any of the long-term residents, ask them about the storm. Everyone, and I stress everyone, has a story. So thank you. And any questions? I can't hear any, but I guess not. Okay, we good? Everybody's muted. I can't hear anything.
Thank you. Joe, that was great. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Any questions?
Hang on a minute and I'll be
Okay.
happy to, if you can unmute yourself, give me a wave. You can hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Anybody have any questions or comments? Rosemary? You have to unmute.
Okay. That one story about the Dolphin Motel, I used to work at the Historical Society in Sea Isle. I love that story about that German U-boat commander. Would you tell me how to spell his last name?
I actually don't know. I suspect it's phonetic, but it's P-L-A-P-P.
I Googled it.
Yes?
It's Plappert. P-L-A-P-P-E-R-T.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
I was just missing, okay, the one P. Okay, that's such a great story. I love that story.
Well, there was a 1981 article in the Atlantic City Press about it. So
he was way cool.
It was a great story.
His wife was a rather large, boned, not fat, large boned German woman, blonde hair, and both of them. I mean, they were a blast, both of them. But anyway,
Thank you.
thank you.
Anyone else have any other comments or questions?
I'd like to read his book.
Thank you.
I hope I didn't bore anybody. I tried to.
Yeah, that's great. It was great.
Great.
It was great.
It was.
Thank you.
It was.
Thank you. And again, I mean, I'm pushing it, of course, but if you'd like a book, contact me. And for Strathmere, I'll deliver.
Do you need any more pictures?
I have a lot of pictures in both books. I try not, there's one or two pictures that are redundant to both books, but there's it's full, just full of all kinds of pictures. You can't see it, but just all kinds of pictures in it. So
Great.
They're great books. I have
Thank
both of them.
thank you.
And
Thank
we thank you, Joe. That was, I'm sorry, you seem like a natural. It didn't seem as if this was awkward for you at all. It felt like we were in the room. No.
Well, you get started, you know. I still work for the Department of Education. I mentor new principals, and
Ah,
what I get to do is a lot of Zoom meetings. And trust me, I've sat through a lot of bad ones, so I didn't want to.
I'm sure.
Together, we would all applaud you.
Yeah, I apologize beforehand before I started because I was in so many bad, you know.
Okay, am I missing anybody?
I just want to say thank you. And it was really good talk.
It was a pleasure. As you can tell, I enjoyed it. So, and I weep for the Sea Isle City I know, because it was all single-family houses. There was 3 churches, there were 2 schools, single-family houses, And each single family house was full of kids. And I weep. I cry. And that's why don't let that happen to Strathmere.
Well, before we say goodnight, and again, thank you so much, Joe, and I'm sure
Thank you,
people
Linda.
will rush out tomorrow to get the book. I went to Sands the other day, and it was pretty crowded for a germaphobe like myself, but I did it for you, Joe, so
Thank you.
in my mask. And one thing I forgot to mention, tomorrow morning is the fishing club is going to put up the newest Osprey platform, and it's in honor of Janet Maley, who was our member at large. She passed away. It'll be a year on August 10th. So if anybody would like to join in at the boat ramp tomorrow between 9:45 and 10ish, the fishing club usually brings a couple of boats in and you can go over. They're going to put it up across from Janet's house. She was 3 or 4 houses from the boat ramp. And I just know she would just be getting the biggest kick out of this. Probably, Dick said probably no birds this summer, but if they build it, I'm sure that they will come. And we also tacked on one of this year's ornaments to go above her plaque. Because she had her turtle one, well, I put it in her coffin, but she had her turtle one on her wall all year round. So anyway, think about Janet tomorrow morning, if you would, and nice remembrance. And again, thank you all, and thank you, Joe. At least we don't have a long walk back from the firehouse. And we'll be in touch. Thank you all again so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
Good night.